feedback. So it can look like all of those things. And then for a few students, we are looking to special education teachers and reading specialists at the middle and high levels to carve out time to provide a few students with daily supplemental intervention that yields on average 2 to 3 years worth of growth in 1 year. Because in order to close their gaps, we need to get what we call above typical growth. So the combination in a tiered system of support between what we do at core and what we do through supplemental intervention is designed to get above typical growth within a year, and that's why you're here. We know that secondary schools are working toward expanding their continuum of evidence-based methodologies, and particularly ones that come from a very short list that have been shown to yield that kind of growth when they're implemented with fidelity. So in most cases, for the kids that we're talking about, they are sitting in what we call the significantly below average range of reading achievement. That is the 0 to 20th percentile of achievement. We have lots of data to support their performance at that level, to include the PSSA over time and the Keystones, amongst many other sources of data. So we know who those kids are. Then it's a matter of setting up the infrastructure to support the provision of daily supplemental intervention for as long as those kids need in order to close or firm up or pretty much solidify basic skills that they're going to need to access core instruction with relative ease and efficiency. So we want to acknowledge all the work that your teams are doing with word generation implementation. Firstly, we hope you're up and running. And as you know, our site visits are coming up soon, but we hope it's going well. And if you want to stay after on the call with any questions about word generation implementation, we can hang out for a few minutes if some of you have some questions about your role maybe with word generation as an advanced tier provider, which could definitely be a part of your role. So just want to do that little bit of nesting before we got started today. And again, let you know that we'll stay after the call if you need any additional supports or you have any concerns or questions about word gen implementation or anything that our wonderful speaker today will be covering, Marilyn Sprick. So I'm going to turn it over now to my colleague, Andra, who's going to do some introductions and be quiet. Thanks, Andra.
Good morning, everybody. On behalf of my colleagues, it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker today. As an educational consultant, Marilyn Sprick has provided training in literacy and academic supports for thousands of educators throughout the United States. As a former teacher, she is well respected for her ability to inspire educators and translate research into practice. As a literacy expert, Marilyn is the lead author of Read Well K2, an early reading program, The Third Quest, a reading intervention for adolescent readers, and the Parallel Universe, a tutorial and field testing. Marilyn is also the author of Pre-Intervention 2, Assessing and Adjusting Academic Support in Early Stage Interventions. Marilyn, a warm welcome to you from us today.
Do you want me to go ahead and take it over now?
Yes. All yours.
All right, I'm going to share my screen. And you're going to see my messy desktop for just a moment as we get this up and running. Thank you very, very much. It's wonderful to be here. What was not included in that introduction is just the fact that I'm a total literacy nerd and enjoying the last years of my career here. And just really enjoying the opportunity of watching kids become competent readers. And as we bring each kid to the point of moving forward with reading, what we're seeing is great excitement. And so what I'm going to do today is share with you some of the programming that we do for our Tier 2 and 3 students who are struggling with readers and probably discouraged and a little disenfranchised as they're moving through the school system. So part of our being a literacy nerds is to also help the kids with their social emotional health. There's nothing more powerful in my literacy nerd head than seeing a kid who has struggled year after year after year, finally learning to read well enough to pick up a book and read it. So we're going to be looking at those students today and some things that we can actually do to help them move forward. We are research-based, and what we're going to be doing today is looking at the applications from research. What we find is oftentimes the research studies are absolutely fascinating, but getting down to the point of how you take that research into actual practice is sometimes mystifying. So we're going to be looking at actual classroom practices that can be done in pullouts with kids as they're in their gen ed courses. And in those multitude of settings that our students are in as they move through their adolescent school years. So that's kind of the background that we're going to have. So with that, I know that you have been putting in information about yourselves in the as you're renaming yourselves so that everybody else can see that. But I prepared a little poll that Andrea is going to launch for us that will let me know basically what your roles are in general, so that as we're moving through the slides, I'll have a little bit of background on the different roles and responsibilities that you have with students that you work with. So just a little bit of a background for me, an invitation for you to participate with me. I do appreciate the opportunity now. I think the very first virtual in-service I did was with Patton. And so the silver lining with COVID, if there are any, are that we are learning to communicate across the country. And that's been a luxury. The downside is I'm not able to walk around and interact with you as much as I would like. But the opportunity of being with you without climbing on a plane is luxurious. So we'll be moving through with this virtual platform, knowing that it would be much nicer actually to be in person. Okay, so let's see. It looks like we have gen ed teachers here. We have consultants and coaches, about a third of you, 2/3 are teachers. And we have administrators with us. That is wonderful. When we do program training, we always ask that our administrators be on board, at least for the introduction to our in-service training, because we know that administrators are the ones who help us with resource allocation. And when we're working with high-risk readers, we know that it's a resource drain as we move through. General education, 81%, wonderful to have you with us. And we have 48% working with intervention students and 62% working with special education students. So nice range of folks that we've got here. When I first started my career, I hate to admit it's about 40 years ago, maybe a little bit more than that. We generally worked with special ed educators, and as the years have gone by, we're seeing that nice mix of gen ed and special ed and intervention folks. So it's nice to have all of you here. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and we can close the poll now. Did you share the results, Andrea?
I
Yes.
did. And
okay. So we can go ahead and close that, and I'm going to go ahead to the next slide. Okay, so we're going to start out with our virtual workshop expectations. My husband, Randy Sprick, is a behavior management specialist who has worked with colleagues across the country for multiple years as well. And he has a classroom management program that's called CHAMPS. And what we do in CHAMPS is we talk about what kind of conversation that we want. And for this virtual workshop, I'm going to hope that you use the chat box and that you use it liberally. I've got mine up so that I can hopefully see comments that you're making, questions that you have. And our colleagues at Patton will help flag me down every once in a while if you should put something in there that needs to be addressed at the time. We want this time to be for you. We know that a half day away from your schools is a real act of dedication in terms of moving forward with professional development. So we appreciate your time and want to make it worthwhile for you. If you want help, you can use the chat books. I've also put my email address up there. Being a close to retiring literacy nerd. I love to hear from people across the nation. And so if you have questions or comments that you would like to share with me, my email address is there, and I will respond. And then we are also going to be talking together periodically in breakout rooms just as time permits. Activities for today, we're going to be listening. I was hired to actually work with you so I could share information with you. I'm going to strongly suggest that you have a pencil and a piece of paper there that you can write down things that you want to remember. We've got some video that you can view and audio recordings that you can share with colleagues when you go back. This is being recorded. But my feeling is when you can see and analyze things and hear things with kids reading, it's helpful. We're going to analyze the things that we're seeing and viewing, and then we're going to do a little bit of practice programming so that we can take things back in a hands-on way. We will take a break at about, let's see, we're going to start 8:30, about 10 for 15 minutes. But in the interim, feel free to stand, stretch, be comfortable. Participation, we want you to think, hopefully, ponder, collegial think alouds, note-taking and engagement, i.e. or e.g. no sleeping, please. You can be comfortable. And then our success is going to be at academic productivity and strategies that we hope will help your kids hold their heads high as they move through the remainder of their school years. So those are my expectations. We use the same template as we are teaching kids the behaviors that we're looking for to keep them engaged so that they know what our expectations are. Okay, with that in mind, I need to move you so that I can get at my controls. There we go. We're going to do a little bit of context setting so that as we're moving through the strategies that we're going to be using with kids, that we're kind of clear in our heads about the support that we're providing. So with kids with special needs, we see three things that they're going to need from us. And as Jennifer was talking about the instruction that we're going to give, we're going to intervene with instruction to prevent problems from occurring. So one of the things that we have to be mindful of is the problems that our high-risk readers are going to be facing when they are facing content area instruction that requires reading. So what can we do with instruction that will prevent problems in as much as possible in whatever setting that we're working in? Then we're also going to be aware that we're going to provide compensatory supports as needed. And we're going to define that as strategies that allow or enable learning to occur despite a disabling condition. So sometimes we're going to provide perhaps tape recorded text for kids who are absolutely not able to read on their own. But what I want to reinforce is that idea of, while that is sometimes necessary for our kids who can't read to access content, it enables learning to occur despite that disabling condition. And so we're there to support them, but it doesn't take care of that disabling condition. Much like if we have a student who has a mobility problem, we're going to give them a wheelchair because we need to allow them to get from place to place that enables mobility. And if we have a child who has a physical disability, but through physical therapy can improve, what we're also going to look at doing is providing remedial services to treat that disabling condition. So if it's a physical disability and we know physical therapy will help, we're going to treat that condition. And with reading disabilities, that is the same issue that we're going to face, is while we're going to enable learning to occur despite the disability of reading problems, we are also going to look at what can we do to treat that condition so that, as Jennifer was saying, the kids make more than a year's worth of progress because they're already behind. My feeling is that our kids who have reading problems, once they leave the school setting, whatever we've done to enable learning to occur, they're not going to be able to necessarily take to them in a working situation. And I view our job as educators as being people who are readying students for whatever they're going to encounter in their once they leave the high school setting. So I'm a strong believer that we need to treat that disabling condition before the kids leave the school setting. So that's the context that we're going to be looking at, and we'll try to contextualize that as we move through. So again, we're watching that chat box. So if any of that doesn't make sense, please feel free to chime in. This is a framework that was set up by Eiseldike, Algazine, and Thurlow in 1992. Wonderful special education colleagues. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at what kinds of intervention we can provide for our high-risk readers. And as we look at the research on adolescent poor readers, we find that they have a combination of problems that lead to comprehension problems. And no matter who is teaching students to read, whether in the content area or in a remedial setting so that they can move forward, our goal is always comprehension. That's what it's all about. But what we know is reading is a complex cognitive task. One of the things that I was lucky at in my early schooling is my original intent was to go into psychology. So my undergraduate degree is in cognitive psychology. And one of the things that brought me to education is I found that the cognitive psychologists study reading because it is such a complex mental task that they feel if they can understand what happens when we read, they go a long ways to understanding how the brain works. So that's been kind of a fun sidebar for me. So what we see from the researchers is that kids who are reading below that 20th percentile oftentimes still have word recognition problems. And that's difficult once that kids are adolescents because theoretically, kids should have learned to read words by the time they were in their first, second, and third grade school years. And now we're getting kids started earlier in kindergarten. So we know that a lot of our older kids are lacking word recognition skills. And that means they lack fluency skills because they can't read text with good prosody expression and at a speed that allows good comprehension. We know that from the cognitive psychs now, that if kids are going to comprehend well, not only do they know how to read the words and read them with fluency, but they also need content knowledge. If they don't have the background knowledge to understand what they're reading, even if they can read it accurately and with fluently, they're going to have difficulty. And we know that has to do with vocabulary. Then the last thing that we know is our high-risk readers, well, all readers need to actively engage in text with motivation in order for comprehension to occur. So when we're working on a comprehensive approach to intervention, we are taking into mind all of those aspects of reading. The reading researchers will say things like pinpoint what skills the kids are missing. If they need vocabulary, teach vocabulary. If they need word recognition and fluency, just do that. But what they oftentimes fail to recognize is that when we are providing support services for kids, we can't take just a group of kids that need vocabulary and another group of kids that need word recognition and another group of kids that teach fluency and find time in the day to provide those targeted things. And so what we've done is we've taken a comprehensive approach that allows us to put groups of kids together who have similar needs. And we also recognize that at the end of the day, when you're reading, the kids need to have control and they need to have executive control of all of those different pieces of comprehension so that they can put it together and use it in a way that works for the kids across the board. So that's the reason that we're looking at a comprehensive approach to intervention. On the other hand, I will say that as a special educator, I've used targeted programs that are highly effective. So I don't want to discourage people from doing that. But this comprehensive approach provides just one more approach to dealing with remediation as well as instruction when you're working with high-risk readers. So we're going to be dealing with all of those issues today in the amount of time that we've got. So the first job that you've got is we're going to take a look at vocabulary, and that's why that was in yellow on that graphic organizer. And so we're going to do a little bit of looking at why vocabulary is so critical to the comprehension that our students are going to have. And then we're going to look at some strategies for teaching vocabulary. So I'm going to put you in the position of being a low performers. And so what I'm going to have you do is I'm going to have you read the passage that is on the slide. Actually, I'm going to read it aloud for you, and then you're going to have a job, and you will be accountable because I'm going to call on a few of you to write your answers in the chat box. So when I give you an assignment, what I'm going to have you do is I'm going to have you summarize as best as you can what this passage means, and we'll give you a couple of minutes to do that after I've read it to you, and then I'll call on a few of you to put your answers in the chat box. Okay, so this is using the Isham-Kuchar method. The Lie algebra of the space-time diffeomorphism group is mapped homomorphically into the Poisson algebra of certain dynamical variables on the phase space of canonical general relativity. Okay, so I'm going to give you a couple of minutes, and I would like you to try to summarize that passage. Okay, if your first name starts with an A through a D, first name A through D, I'd like you to put your summary, or as close as you could get, in the chat box. You can also say I couldn't get it. Well, not sure. Very hard to summarize. Vocabulary and impeded comprehension. I could not get it. I do not comprehend. Wait for 1 or 2 months. My summary is these words do not make sense to me, and how important it is to learn new words. Okay, you can go ahead and keep adding your comments if you'd like. And those of you that have first names that begin after C, you can go ahead and add if you'd like. But that's the common response that we get from people is, I don't get it. And the problem is what? It's vocabulary, isn't it? Once in a while, I have people go, well, it must have something to do with math because of the word algebra, right? And, I think it's space-time diffeomorphism. So maybe is it something to do with physics? Yeah, starting to get a little bit of an idea there. And some people will really work it if I give them enough time. But that's about as much as we can get out of it, unless you are a physics major. This is actually, I don't know whether you noticed, it's only one sentence. It was the first sentence of my sister-in-law's brother's physics dissertation. And it took him 7 years to finish his doctoral program. And so when he got his dissertation done, we said, well, let us see what it is. I read that first sentence and did exactly what you did. It's like, forget it. There's no way I can decode those words. I can read it fluently, but I have no idea what it means because I'm lacking the vocabulary. So that's why we teach vocabulary to kids. It's really important to comprehension. And so what we're going to do is we're going to share 4 simple guidelines for teaching vocabulary. There are a multitude of vocabulary strategies out there that are research-based, that are wonderful. But what I know is this, is we cannot, unless we're going with a targeted intervention with just vocabulary, all of those strategies can't be used within the context of teaching additional things like content and process and all of the things that we need to do in order to help kids through their content areas. So what we do is we use these 4 simple guidelines that are research-based because the research is very clear that there are many different ways that work. There's no one way of teaching vocabulary that is the way you must go. So we're going to pre-teach essential vocabulary and concepts. And for a while in the field, we started talking about you need to pre-teach academic vocabulary, and that is absolutely still correct. But we also know that in order for the kids to understand the text they read, they need to have domain-specific words that are essential for understanding the passages that they're reading. So we look at teaching 2 different types of vocabulary words. One words that are academic that will be used across disciplines, but we also are going to select vocabulary words that are essential to understanding the passages and the content that the kids are required to learn for their content area classes or the passages they're reading. From Isabel Beck, we learned that we want student-friendly definitions, and we're going to actually practice looking at that. What I found is when I go to the glossary of different books, even looking online at definitions from the internet, that oftentimes the vocabulary definitions are laden with a lot of vocabulary that the kids don't know. So we want definitions that are very easy for the kids to understand, and then we can layer in more difficulty as the kids learn those words. The thing that I found most powerful as we are teaching vocabulary is helping the kids make connections with their prior knowledge and their prior experience, things that they are used to, so that they can wrap their heads around how to use those words in the context that they understand and then apply it to novel contexts. So what we do is we use examples that go from easy to difficult. And the thing that has helped us understand how to do that is we work on programming from familiar context to less familiar contexts, and from concrete examples to abstract examples. And then the researchers are pretty clear that we need to have the students use the words many times in many different contexts. Now, what does all of that look like? We're going to look at teaching the word compromise. And so what we're going to do is we're going to teach the kids to break it into syllables because a lot of times the kids who are poor readers have trouble with multisyllabic words. So you guys can be kids and you can mouth the words as I teach it to you. So we're going to learn about the compromise of 1850. So there's the context of teaching this word. And so the word is compromise. So we're going to do a finger count on the syllables and you're going to say it with me. So I want to see your fingers up. We're going to go compromise, compromise. Okay, so everybody do it with me. It's compromise, compromise. And then if I were working with kids, and I'm not going to stop and do this right now, what I might do is I'll whip around with what do you already know about the word compromise, because that's something that many of the kids would have heard and may have some background knowledge on, and we want to acknowledge that. And I would especially do that if I was working in a gen ed classroom with the kids. Then I'm going to go at a student-friendly definition. So you guys know a lot about compromise already. Here's an easy way to remember what it entails. First, there's a problem or a disagreement. And in the solution, each side wins something and each side loses something. So each side does what? Each side wins and each side does what? Loses. Okay, so keeping that in mind, we're going to do this. We're going to have you work with the word compromise. So there was that student-friendly definition. And the direction said, and then we want the kids to work with examples that help them make connections to their own lives. So here are two compromise situations. So first there's a problem, and then in a compromise, each side wins something and each side loses something. So here's the first example. You would like to be able to come in by midnight. Your parents have given you a 9 p.m. curfew. What are some possible compromises? Remember, in a compromise, each side does what? Wins something, and each side loses something. Okay, we're going to move into breakouts in just a little bit to give you the opportunity of being kids and working on these examples that hopefully are close to things that you understand. Okay, now the next compromise is you would like a pair of Nike Air Zooms. The cost is $150, but your parents would like you to go to Target and get a pair of Vendy Casuals. The cost is $29.98. So what are possible compromises? All right, now I'm going to put you in breakout rooms, or Andrea is for us. And what we're going to do is we're going to have you work in threes, and we're going to give you 8 minutes. And what I'd like you to do is come up with possible compromises to the first one here, the curfew problem, and possible compromises to the Nike Air Zoom problem. And so you're going to have about 4 minutes per item to come up with some possible compromises. And then when we come back, we'll have some of you put your compromises in the chat box. So you want to be sure to write down what your compromises are and select one person that would put in answers for the first compromise with the curfew, and the second, pick somebody else to put in answers for the Nike Air Zoom problem. Okay, so we're going to give you 8 minutes and breakouts to practice with those examples. The kids benefiting from that conversation. Okay, let's look at the compromise for you would like a pair of Nike Air Zooms. The cost is $150. Your parents would like to get a pair of Vendy Casuals, cost $29.98. So let's see what our possible compromises are in the chat room with those of you who have that one. Pay $30 towards the more expensive shoes. Pay half. Tell them to wait till Christmas or their birthday. And not knowing the total comes off their Christmas or birthday gifts, give extra chores for them to earn extra money. Okay, you can see how once you get on a roll, you can just brainstorm those options. Meet in the middle, get shoes for $80. Parent agrees to pay for $30. Child would have to work, shovel the snow, walk the dogs for extra money. Completing chores for work. Buying cheaper shoes, and then put the Nike swoosh on the cheaper ones. I love it. My sister actually had a friend whose mom sewed Pendleton labels into the skirts that she made. So, you know, these are all real things, but you can see how the kids are going to get into those discussions. And now that word compromise is kind of fun for them. And it will take them to the next part, which is the compromise of 1850. And now the teacher is free to talk about, so in the year 1850, people were needing to compromise as well. There were, let's see if I've got it, I didn't put it in. There were 15 northern states. There were 15 southern states. The northern states were free states. The southern states were slave states. And so the balance of power was what? It was, let me see your mouths move. It was equal, wasn't it? 15 and 15. Now, here was the problem that occurred. California asked to be admitted to the Union as a free state. What would this do to the balance of power? And now we can have the kids talk about those discussions. And it also gets into rich questions. And we know that reading comprehension involves kids asking questions. That's a really powerful strategy. And now we have the kids start talking about, well, what are some of the things that these people could trade off? What could they compromise on in terms of getting down into the details of the controversy that was going on at that time? So now we've set the kids up, and you can see now we've got a more engaging activity because we can keep going back to, well, it was just like the Nike Zoom problem. All right, so that's working on vocabulary. Now, one of the other 4 guidelines that we gave you was the researchers said you want to have the kids use the words many times in many situations. So what we need to provide our students with are simple tools that will allow them to use the word over and over and over again. So if I introduce the word compromise on Monday and we do that little activity, and then we go into the compromise of 1850 because that's the content area that I'm teaching, then on Tuesday as a warm-up activity, see, we want them to use the words across time, I'm going to have them write the word here and then write their own definition of the word compromise. Now, if the kids can define the words in words that they understand, they're now paraphrasing whatever we taught them, and it may be exactly what we said, but what they are doing is they're taking ownership of the definition. Then the next day, we're going to have them bring the vocabulary log out. They've got their word, they've got their definition. Now we're going to have them write a sentence using it and draw a picture of it. So that process becomes very powerful and a really simple tool. If you would like a copy of this actual PDF of the student worksheet, I'll figure out a way to get it to you, because this is just a really simple little activity that can be done by the kids. And I actually, when I was teaching a writing class at the University of Oregon, I had my graduate students use this log for different vocabulary words that we were working on and the research that they were finding about it. So very useful even at a graduate level. I've used it with third grade kids, with high school kids, middle school kids, and across the curriculum. Could you use this in math? Yeah, because math is vocabulary laden as well. Okay, this is an example of a high school teacher that I worked with, and we did this wonderful in-service in that we shared these activities that I'm sharing with you today, and then the teachers were able to go back and apply the strategies that they felt would be useful in their own classrooms, and then bring back samples for us in a follow-up in-service. It was a wonderful way to do collegial building of strategies. So they got to bring back stuff that they had done, and they shared it with us. And this was an English teacher, obviously. She was teaching hyperbole, and she did allow the kids to copy the definition. So it's an obvious exaggeration. And you can tell which is the low kid, which is the high kid. But what I love is the application that these kids made. So the high performing students said, here's my example of a hyperbole. The movie was so bad, it made staying at home with my parents sound fun. And then she drew a picture. Let's play bingo. Perfect example of hyperbole. But what was even more enchanting for me as a special ed teacher is this was our low kid. The movie was as bad as a root canal sounded fun. So there's your hyperbole, is that the movie was so bad, it made a root canal sound like it was fun. Obviously, the sentence structure is not what we would like it to be, but nod your head if you think the kid got the concept. Yeah. So that's a really nice strategy that you can potentially take back with you. Okay, now, this is an example of a ratio. There's your math example. And the math website, this was the definition of it. A ratio shows the relative sizes of two or more values. Ratios can be shown in different ways by using the colon to separate examples values, or as a single number by dividing one value by the total. Got it? It's a little bit like the Isham-Kuchar method. Okay, then the textbook glossary definition was the quotient of two quantities with the same units. Still hard because the kids may not know quotient, have difficulty with quantities, and what is the same unit. So we've still got some problems there. And then this is the Cambridge Dictionary, a comparison of two numbers calculated by dividing, also relationship between two groups or amounts that expresses how much bigger one is than the other. So difficult to wrap your heads around if you are not a mathematician. And so I'm going to give you 2 minutes. And what I'd like you to do is come up with a simple definition of a ratio, that are at-risk students, as well as our high kids, can at least begin understanding it with. So writing down your answers. And you can look up when you've got it done. Okay, if your first name starts with an M through a Z, could you put your student-friendly definition in the chat box? Shows a relationship between two numbers much easier. Comparing two amounts of the same thing. I get it. Relationships between two numbers and quantities. Now, what's cool is you guys it took you 2 minutes to do it. And so those are the kinds of things that we're going to ask our teachers to do, is rather than having the kids rely on the definitions that they're finding in their textbooks, is we're going to go for those student-friendly definitions and then have the kids put it in their own words to double. It also gives us feedback. Are they understanding the concepts that we're trying to teach to them? And, I came up with something very, very similar, compares two numbers. So those are the kinds of things that we're going to be doing as we go back and work with our content area. Okay, now I'm going to move us forward. What we're going to do next is you're going to watch a video of our doing the type of vocabulary activities with students so that you can actually see the instruction and how it looks with kids when you're using student-friendly definition, helping them make connections with things that they understand, and then additional things that can go on as you're doing vocabulary instruction, reusing the words that they've had before within those vocabulary lessons, as well as in the content areas that they're studying. So as you're watching the video, I'm going to strongly recommend, so that it's interactive for you, that you write down the positive practices that you think are worth doing with your students if you are a teacher, or worth sharing with colleagues as you are helping them with vocabulary in either a pull-out setting or in their core classrooms. And then you can also look at missed opportunities and questions, and we'll address those at the other side of the video. So these are special ed kids. And so you'll notice that they're not going to show great exuberance and excitement, but they are engaged as you watch the video. They are working with two vocabulary words. One is Madagascar, because that's providing content knowledge in that vocabulary lesson. So we're taking care of two things at one time. And then the other thing that they're working on is the word asset. Working on some sophisticated words and some words that you've already heard and know. And so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to put hands up, because we're going to count the syllables in those big words so that you can keep reading more and more sophisticated words. So the first word is Madagascar. Everybody say it. Madagascar. Okay, now put your fingers up for each syllable. It's Madagascar. And the word is Madagascar. Excellent. Madagascar is a large island off the coast of Africa. So everybody look at the picture of Africa, and can you find Madagascar? Okay, now this is kind of interesting. There have been some movies about Madagascar, haven't there? Okay, Madagascar is the 4th largest island in the world. So is it big or small? Big. Big. So for an island, it would be massive. Nice job. Excellent use of vocabulary. So let's say again, what is the 4th largest island in the world? Everybody, what is it?
Madagascar.
Is it Hawaii?
No.
No, it's
Madagascar.
And it's off the coast of the big continent of Africa. Ooh, you guys are good. Okay, about 80% of the species in Madagascar are found nowhere else in the world. I wonder why so many species in Madagascar are only found there. Okay, so I want you to think about some questions that you have about Madagascar. Talk to your partner and come up with at least 1 or 2 questions that you have about Madagascar. So why you get to start. Ask a question about Madagascar.
Like, I'm wondering if there's a lot of animals out there.
You're wondering if there are a lot of animals, how many different kinds? That's a great question. And Alexis, you get to ask a question about Madagascar.
Madagascar.
Why is it called Madagascar? Excellent questions. Okay, Marla, you get to ask a question.
I think, what if it was part of Africa once and it just split up?
Was it part of Africa once and did it just split off? Boy, you guys are sharp. Taryn,
What does it look like?
what does it look like there? Would you like to visit there? Huh? While the team is there, we might find some more about it. Okay, those of you that didn't get a turn will get a turn on the next one, okay? Okay, the next word is acid. Everybody, what's the word?
Acid.
Okay, an acid, so we're gonna do it with our fingers. Acid, and what's the word?
Acid.
Good, an acid is something that is useful or valuable. So instead of saying, having a good sense of humor was important, you could say having a good sense of humor was an acid. Nice job, Haley, you're really paying attention. Good job. Okay, the football player was an asset to his team. So everybody, what was the football player? He was an
Acid.
That's right, he was an asset. Okay, so I want you to do some thinking about this. I'm going to give you 10 seconds to think about it, and then people who haven't had turns yet are going to have some turns. Okay, so what skills do you think made the football player an asset? Okay, think in your own heads. Okay, when you've got an answer, put your hand on your head. Okay, Dylan. He was good at throwing the football. That would be an asset, wouldn't it? Okay, hands on your head if you've got another idea. Jacob.
He looks like a good wide receiver.
Great wide receiver. That would be an asset, wouldn't it? Okay, put your hands on your head if you've got another idea. Okay, Wyatt.
He's probably really good at catching the ball.
He's good at catching the ball. So all of those things would be assets, wouldn't they? Oh, nice job, you guys. Okay, the next word is one that you've had before. It's ominous. Let's say it with our fingers. It's ominous. Okay, now, looking at what it says in your book, the weatherman's warning was ominous. I want you to think about what the word ominous means as used in the sentence. So here's the sentence again. The weatherman's warning was ominous. Now I'm going to read the answers and you're going to think about, is the answer 1, is it 2, or is it 3? And what you're going to do is you're going to put what you think it is as you hear me read the answers. Okay, the weatherman's warning was ominous. Does that mean the weatherman's words were funny?
No.
Number 1. Answer to yourself. Does it mean the words were threatening? So you want to put number 2 on your chest. Number 3, the weatherman's words were interesting. Which one do you think it is? Okay, number 2. Number 1 says the words were funny. Do you think like a big hurricane or whatever would be funny? No. Okay, number 2, the weatherman's words were threatening. Who had number 2 on their chest? Why did you have number 2?
Because a hurricane is threatening.
Threatening. A hurricane is threatening, and the fancy word for that is ominous. So if you had number 2 on your chest, you had it right. Cool.
Okay, so if you would each put one thing that you would love to employ in your own classrooms or, excuse me, share with colleagues, if you would put that in the chat box, we'll take a look at what was resonating with you. Repetition. Use of examples and non-examples, especially in the multiple choice. Connections with what the kids understood. Allow students to ask questions, connections with prior knowledge, explain it and having them explain it back. Using a number on the chest to answer. Ask a question to show understanding. Private response, number on the chest. Asking students what they want to know. Having students signal the answer, more participation. Asking questions. The asking questions is really powerful, and it does come up in the comprehension research. But what you find is that if the kids are asking questions in the vocabulary exercises, then when they get to their reading and they find the answers to those questions in their readings, they get really excited, and there you get that engagement. Lots of repetition, having students ask questions, yeah. So this is being recorded. So if you want to share that video with your with your colleagues, it's going to be available to you and on the binder that Patton provides for you. Okay, so let's see. Could we, Andrea, go ahead and publish that poll on vocabulary?
Yes, I'll get to that right now. Just launch the poll.
Okay, what we're asking is what students would benefit from the vocabulary strategies that we just looked at. And again, we just tried to do in a nutshell things that could be usable. And you can respond to more than one of those answers.
They're responding fast. We have 64% participated, so I'll wait till it gets to a higher percentage before sharing.
Great.
70%. %.
I appreciate all of your participation here.
We're up to 83%. Can we get a few more and then I'll share?
Perfect.
Okay, it's staying at 83% participating. So I'm going to end the poll and share the results.
Yeah. So 92% of those of you who responded said gen ed kids could benefit from this. 96% said intervention students and 96% said special education students. So we've got a wide range of kids who potentially could benefit from this. And, you know, vocabulary is fun to teach and the kids really enjoy it as well. So there you've got your engagement and across the board viable for lots of different kids. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and go on. And so we're going to close that poll. And we're going to go back to that graphic organizer again, which is a research-based strategy as well. And we're going to look, excuse me, at word recognition, fluency, and content knowledge, and how we can address some of those needs for our kids. So we're going to start out with listening to a student, and then we're going to talk about what that kiddo needs. And so as you're listening to Amber, what I'm going to ask you to do is to write down the errors that she makes, since you don't have that passage right in front of you. So go ahead and write down the errors that you hear. This is a standard little 1-minute timing, and just due to things that were going on, I inadvertently gave her the first 2 words. So I said, would you start with in nature? So I did not count that in the minute. Okay, so this is Amber, special ed student. Let's see, she was a 6th grader. Oops.
In nature, swimmed seaweed. In nature, seaweed prevents a safe habitat for habitat and food for many different sea animals. And it is an important plant for the ocean's food. Crab chain because food chain, because seaweed is rich in vitamins and minerals that are needed for many creatures.
Makes your head hurt, doesn't it? That's real. And when Amber sat down, this is a Dibbles passage. When Amber sat down with me, she said, my reading sucks. And I thought, after listening to this, it was like, you're right. It does. And so now we're going to get down to error analysis. This poor child, she's 7 years of this. And I'm thinking, how is it that she's still coming to school? And this child had absolutely no absences. She was in school every single day. And you understand the feelings. Okay, those of you who are gen ed teachers, if you have a special ed student, you may have a kiddo who reads like this. And so in my head, this is, I cannot do it. It's not I won't do it, it's a can't do it. She can't do it. So when we assign reading, somebody's going to have to read it to her. That's all there is to it. Now, are we going to give up on her? That's the next question. And so that's why we talked about enabling. Somebody's going to have to read it to her. If she's in a peer partnership, she's not going to be able to read it to her partner. She's just going to have to listen. So she read Seaweed for Swimmed. She read Province for Provides. I'm sorry, I've got it backwards. Hyundai for Habitat, for and, part for plant, for of, crab for chain, needed for necessary. So the one strategy that she has is look at the first letter and then guess. And you know what? It's not sufficient, is it? And teaching vocabulary, going to help her? Conceptually, yes, conceptually. But in terms of being able to read it herself, no, the differential's too big. Okay, now, this is Amber having gotten an intensive remedial program where we pulled her out of class, her gen ed courses, to take a remedial course. This is treatment. And this is Amber at the end of the year. Now, I do have to say that this is a repeated read. So she's read it before, but listen to the difference.
Do more than one.
Let's see. Okay, so you're going to go ahead and start here.
Today, scientists use a scientific method to solve mysteries from the past. Step 1, observation. The Great Pyramid of Egypt stands as tall as a 30-foot building. Step 2, question. How did the Egyptians move massive stones to build the Great Pyramid? Step 3, hypothesis. Thousands of workers were hired to build the Great Pyramid. Millions of stones were cut and dragged across wet sand in sleds. Then the stones were moved up the pyramid with ramps. Step 4, test. In artifacts, men can be seen dragging a heavy stone object.
Big difference. You can actually hear her processing text at this point. She still had trouble with ramps. Those short vowels are always ongoing problems. And so we're going to keep firming that up with her. But when Amber read this to me, it's a real child, fictitious name. She was beaming when she finished. She was absolutely beaming. And what I told her is, you know what, you've become a reader this year. And the smile on her face was better than any salary that could be given to somebody. It was just precious. So that's the goal that we've got with these kids is, yes, we're going to do some instruction that allows them to be successful in their content area classes, but we're also going to look at intensive intervention. And there isn't a kiddo out there that I've run into that can't learn to read better. So those are the strategies that we're going to work on. And I'm going to suggest for a child like Amber, what we're going to need to do is use a prescribed program. because the amount of programming that goes into teaching the vocabulary, the content knowledge, because this is, ancient history, and teaching the phonics skills that these kids need, it has to be pre-planned in a very systematic way, and it takes a long time to program those things. I also would not ask a classroom teacher to do the kind of instruction on foundational reading skills that are not germane to the great majority, hopefully, of kids in those content area gen ed courses. So Amber en route with a structured program. This was my adolescent reading program, the Third Quest. So we know we can move the kids forward. So with that in mind, we're going to look at a lesson from another student. This is Marcos. Marcos read much better than little Amber that you heard. She was reading, I think, 26 words correct per minute at best. And Marcos was reading more like about 100 words correct per minute. He actually ended up dropping out of school. And this was an interview that I did with him. And one of the things that I found is that when you can pull kids aside one-on-one, they will share with you things that they would not share with a group. And so Marcos had done some remediation. And at one point, he actually dropped out of school and then he got some remediation. But at one point, he actually got some good grades. And that was because he had a girlfriend who was academically capable and he wanted to try to keep up with her. So that was his motivation. He was not a special ed student. He was not identified, but he had a reading disability. So he's reading a little under 100 words correct per minute. So this is what Marcos said about what it took him to get good grades and his response to why it took him so long to get his work done.
I was doing really good the beginning of my sophomore year, mostly just to impress her, and for myself, of course. I felt pretty good that, I didn't ever think that, if I really cracked the whip on myself and got down to business that, I'd be pretty much a B average student. I'd come home and I was drinking a lot of coffee and staying up until at least 3 o'clock in the morning doing all my homework because it'd take me a good 2 hours extra than most of the other kids.
Did you know why it was taking you so long to get your homework done?
I thought that it was just that I was a little bit slower at studying and I had to, put a little bit more effort because we'd have a reading assignments and I was slow at reading. And that made it hard for me to get deep into what I was reading and understand it. And so I had to read a lot of the material once or twice at night and then get up in the morning before a test and read it another 2 times. And that took me a lot of time. I didn't really think that I had a problem with reading. I thought that, I was slower. I just had to, give it some hard work. Mm-hmm. But I kind of got tired of that and I didn't want to work that hard. It was kind of wearing me down and, I got discouraged and I was probably only sleeping maybe 4 hours a night. I questioned myself a lot, is there something wrong with me? I'd ask my mom, did you drop me on my head? Or, my mom, she always told me that, it wasn't anything wrong with me. I just needed to read more, just keep reading. And I took her advice for a little while and tried reading some books and, just keep reading. And I just got tired of it because I'd read and it'd take me so long. At that time, I didn't have the skills to read or improve. And it just got boring to me, like I was going nowhere.
I felt like I was going nowhere. All of us have worked with kids where the thought is, if he would just try harder, I know he could do it. And then Marcos, a kid like him, he got B's in a class. And, that's validating to us as teachers. We're going, well, see, he can do it if he tries. What we don't know is the backstory. It took him 3 pots of coffee, sleeping 4 hours a night, doing it day after day after day, and he just couldn't keep it up. And then that self-esteem issue, you know, what he knew he had a reading problem, and that's all that was his problem. Bright kid, capable. You can hear what a delightful sense of humor he had. I asked my mom, did she drop on my head or something? You know, but he's also thinking, I thought I was a little slow or something. You know, so he thinks there's something wrong with him. And, you know, again, another remedial story, he ended up learning to read well, but it was only after he dropped out of school. So one of the reasons that we're doing this is to help these kids that we think can possibly do it if they just try harder. But again, what it takes when you read half power. So he was reading about 100 words a minute. Your fully capable readers are reading about 200 words a minute, and that's out loud. At about 200, 180 to 200, you're topping out your articulatory system. And so you're probably reading faster than that silently. But Marcos is at least half power to the kids who are doing well in school. And so trying to keep up with that is extremely difficult. So we're going to publish another little poll for you. Andrea, if you could pull up the one that is for Marcos, it's the next one. What I'm going to have you do is identify whether you think Marcos' academic problems were the result of a won't do it problem, a can't do it problem, or a can't sustain problem.
Thanks for participating. We're up to about 66%. So I'll wait till we get to about 80 again, and then we'll stop the poll.
Great.
Wonderful. Okay. I'll share the results.
So we've got no one saying it's a won't do problem, although that's the way it was perceived in his school. About 28% of you say it's a can't do problem and 72% can't sustain. So there you go. It's somewhere in there. And that's what a lot of our kids face. Unfortunately, this student was not a special ed student, so he wasn't getting any support. There was a point at which he did an intervention class, but unfortunately the teacher wasn't given the tools to actually move him forward. Okay. So we're going to move forward from Marcos. We're going to take a break in just a little bit. Oops. Sorry, having click problems. I actually had a slide for that. How about that? Okay, we're going to look at one more case study. This is Scarlett. She is probably one of the most dyslexic students I've ever had the opportunity to work with. Actually, charming student. And you're going to listen to her read Hello, Hong Kong. It's from Dibbles Next. I'm going to talk a little bit about what some of her problems are. And then on the other side of the break, we'll actually look at what we can do to help these kids. Okay, so this is Scarlett reading Hello, Hong Kong. If you would make a list of her errors, that would be great.
Warm air means a change in the weather, and summer means to travel to many families for the chance family things. Summer was going to be an exciting time of year. For the first time, they would take the underground travel route from their home to southern China and travel to Hong Kong.
Okay, so 1 minute was right here. So the errors that you heard at the end of that don't count in that 1 minute timing. but Scarlett read 43 words in a minute with 4 errors. She read to for in, she read things for this, she read travel for train, and she read route for ride. And so her words correct per minute were 39 words correct per minute, another middle school student. Now, the reason I love to play this example is this is your classic truly dyslexic kid. So she was looking, she was getting most of the words. The errors that she made sense and were syntactically correct. But when she got to train ride, she said travel route. And that's an indication that you've got a really, really bright kid here who's looking at the initial consonants at the beginning of each of those words and coming up with more sophisticated words than what it actually says, but it still makes sense. And that's just amazing to me. Very, very bright, capable kid, but just has a really major problem with word recognition and fluency. Strong vocabulary, different kind of child than Amber was. All right, now the reason I wanted to play that is the teachers in Scarlett's school had the fluency numbers. They were all the gen ed teachers were giving the fluency numbers. Scarlett was an angry child. And in listening to her, after we looked at those numbers, what I did is I thought, in seeing what she was being asked to do in her gen ed courses, what I asked to do was actually, I had Scarlett read to me, excuse me, I'm going to try and find my, there we go. I had Scarlett read to me her, from her social studies book. And what I'd like you to do is listen to what it sounds like now trying to take those skills into the content area class. So here we go.
So we're going to read a little bit about the first emperor of China. His name was Emperor Qin. I'll just let you read out loud. 22.3, it says standardizing the culture. Okay. Emperor Qin wanted to unify China. He began to standardize cultural practices that differed from place to place. Okay, you go ahead and start reading out loud.
One key step was the a unformed system of laws. A number of the emperor's new laws were at government offices were punished if the grain in storage supply, or if a wall built under their called, I don't know. Other laws governing everyday life, for example, windows were not all
So the story is ancient religion. So I'm going to start reading.
The emperor's laws were passed on
You're going to try and catch someone.
lives. The laws were told, and they spelled out yeah, I don't know.
Painful. So that, it's one thing listening to him read for a minute. It's another thing. I just let her read. And I decided I wasn't going to help her. I just wanted to see what was happening when she was trying it on her own. This student's compensatory skills were so strong. She could answer comprehension questions by picking out 1 or 2 words that she knew, matching them up with what was in the textbook, and then copying from the textbook. And so again, the teacher's idea was she can do it if she tries. And, you know, after listening to her, it's like, this is, and I actually played this tape for her gen ed teachers, and they were in total shock. They had no idea that what she was grappling with was to this degree. Okay, now, if we look at Scarlett, so the question is, how would you feel when asked to read? Think about that. How would you feel when asked to read? How would you feel when asked to partner up, with each partner taking a part and reading aloud to each other? And then the question is this: what would you do? Would you become apathetic? Would you get angry and leave? Would you clown around? What would you do? So we're going to publish another one of those polls. So let's see, Andrea, could you publish that poll on Scarlett? The questions are, what would you do if you were Scarlett? Become apathetic, get angry and leave, or clown around? And is her problem a won't do, a can't do, a can't sustain? Mm.
We're almost at 80%.
Perfect.
So I'll just wait a couple more seconds. There we go. Okay, I'll end the poll, and there are the results.
So we've got 65% of you would just get apathetic. That's a behavior problem, isn't it? And that's actually the one that's the hardest, because they've just given up. You could get angry and leave. That's really hard to deal with when kids do that. However, it tells you this: they still care. If they were not getting angry, you know, if they are getting angry, they care about what's going on. Or you might clown around. And some of our kids do that, don't they? They also ask to go to the restroom if they have to read aloud. They'll find ways to get around what's going on in class. Scarlett got angry. This child would just get up and leave class. She spent more time. She never left the school, but she was spending about 20% of her time in class and about 80% just sitting out in the hallway. Of her choice, she left. Understandable. She has now finished her first novel, and we're excited about that. She still carries a lot of scars from this being so difficult for her. She's not reading at grade level, but she can read novels that are designed for adolescent teenage kids. So that's cool. She feels good about that. Okay, most of you are saying it's a can't do or a can't sustain problem. I would agree with you. It's a very difficult position for a kid to be in. So we are up against 10 o'clock. This is magic that it occurred right at this moment. We're going to take a 15-minute break, and we're going to come back and look at what we're going to do for Scarlett, for Amber, and other things that you can take back for the kids that are at various levels in their reading disabilities. So have a nice break. We'll see you in 15 minutes, 10:15. Here we go. It's nice to have you back. Just to kind of cap off Scarlett's story, I'm going to play a little audio for you, and you'll be able to hear how, despite the fact that she read that passage so poorly, she was still comprehending at some level. And there again is that child who's going to compensate for that difficulty that she's got. By the time she finished reading that social studies passage that ran about 2 to 3 minutes long, I had no idea what she read. I had no idea, but I want you to listen to her comprehension and what she felt as she was doing that.
I can't read anymore. It's too confusing.
Okay, that's okay. So if you were reading by yourself, when you got to that point where we were just now, what would you do?
I would probably just stop and give up and try
No,
to
she
math.
left class.
Yeah. That's good because it, how does it make you feel?
It makes me kind of feel stupid.
Makes me feel
And you know
stupid.
you're not though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to ask you one question. Out of that reading that you did, can you tell me one thing that the Emperor Chin did?
He made laws.
See, she got
he
it.
fought wars.
Yes. Okay, you know what I was really impressed with? You got some of the words that I didn't expect you to get. So for example, widows, you got that one, didn't you?
Yeah.
You know what a widow is?
A widow is somebody who lost their husband in battle.
Yes, and it says, so one of his laws was that widows were not allowed to remarry. Why do you suppose he decided that?
I don't know.
He just made up his own laws, didn't he?
Yeah.
So some of them may have made sense, but some of them, what happened if an official built a grain house and the grain spoiled?
They were punished.
Yeah. So see, she was pulling it out despite the fact, but you also heard her say, I just can't keep it up. I can't do it anymore. So there's that can't sustain. Okay, what do? We're going to take a little bit of look at why fluency is important. You can hear it, right? But we also know this. This is a new NAEP study, IES study that I love to share with people because it validates what we think we know about these kids. But what they did was they took a look at students who were advanced on the NAEP at the end of 4th grade, students who were proficient on the NAEP, and students who were basic, and then students who were below basic. And they did oral reading fluency scores on those students. Because I have people say, why are you looking at fluency? Why is that important? We're more interested in comprehension. And what they found is this direct correlation between fluency and proficiency in generalized reading skills. So they found at the end of 4th grade that students who were advanced read an average of 160 words correct per minute. Kids who were proficient, one step down, read 142 words correct per minute, and students who were basic read 123 words correct per minute. Now, what's fascinating is the kids that you're interested in, the below kids for this workshop, is they took the below basic kids and they divide them into high, low, medium below basic, and low below basic. And what you see is the higher low kids read 108 words correct per minute. The medium low kids read 95 words correct per minute. And the lowest kids were at about 71 words correct per minute. So the fact that this correlation is so stair-steppy is just incredible. But it also tells us that fluency is a really good thermometer measure of how well these kids are going to do in multiple contexts with their reading. So again, it's fascinating that, and I wish they had done this study earlier. This was done in 2018. And there's no reason to believe that by the time the kids get to 8th grade, it's going to be any different. These are Hasbrook and Tyndall fluency norms. Jerry and Jan are out of the same university that I'm out of. And what they did was in 2006, they published norms that were done on thousands of kids with oral reading fluency. There are new norms that are out that are very, very similar, but don't include the 7th and 8th grade kids. So I just have been using the 2006 norms since they're very similar. But what you see is this is 6th grade. Kids at the 20th percentile quit making progress at the end of 6th grade. It just stops in oral reading fluency. Kids at the 50th percentile stay the same. Kids at the 80th percentile stay the same. And so what you see is that across time, these kids plateau out. So without intervention, we know based on the data that they're not going to move forward. And so that means that they're going to hobble through their middle school and high school years. So that's why we really appreciate all of your time and all the effort that you're putting into these kids, because it makes a huge difference as to whether they're going to be engaged or they're going to be disenfranchised, starting with their middle school, high school years, and then I believe into their adult life. And I think that's a lot of what we're seeing right now is if you can't read well, you are disenfranchised. You may be able to do Twitter, read well enough to
read a short little piece. But can you sit down and digest more sophisticated text? I don't think so. My husband just had a minor medical procedure that's just routine, and the directions that had to be read and that we read over and over and over again just made me realize, these kids that we've got can't do this. And so all of those things are realities as they move forward. Okay, now, what are we going to do about it then? So for the Ambers and the Scarlets of the world that we've been able to make a difference with, we've gone back to foundational reading skills. Again, I would not ask a content area teacher to do this because it's outside of what their mandate is to teach. I will ask a content area teacher to do the vocabulary instruction because every kid can benefit from that. So what we're going to do is we're going to take kids who may have some foundational reading skills. Amber, nothing. I mean, she had very, very little. She had consonant sounds. That was about it. Scarlett, you could hear her. She was processing text. She was sounding out words periodically. It just took forever. So we know some of these kids have some foundational skills, but they've not built them to a level of automaticity that allows them to focus on comprehension. So what we're going to do is the research basically says, if these students still need phonemic awareness, we need to go back to that level of being able to hear sounds and words. And I typically do that in the context of spelling. Usually, unfortunately, we don't have enough time to remediate everything the kids need. So if there isn't enough time to do systematic phonics instruction and spelling, we'll start here. So we're going to do phonics systematically and explicitly, and the research is very clear about that, whether the kids are just low performing students, whether they're dyslexic, it doesn't matter where they fall on that spectrum. We know that they need systematic and explicit phonics instruction. And that means that you have to have an established sequence of sounds that you are reintroducing to the kids. Because if you take general text and you just try to target specific words, you're never going to fill in those foundational skills that the kids need with the level of systematic and explicitness that needs to happen with these kids. So what we find is that they typically need to go back and relearn vowels to the level of automaticity. And then they need repeated practice in decodable passages. So how do we keep the kids from context cueing and just looking at the initial consonant and guessing? We make sure that the passages they practice are made of words that are composed of the sounds that we've retaught them. So those are all of the processes that we're looking for. So this is the way a word study looks like. And we're going to do drill and practice with the kids. And what we're going to teach them is this concept. Oops, sorry. If you are a football player, despite the fact that you are in good shape and you're strong, we're going to start your practice sessions with exercises, warm-ups, jumping jacks, push-ups, things that you've known, if you're a football player, you've been doing since the time that you were really, really young. Very, very simple things, but they build muscles. And so what we're going to teach the kids is we're going to go back and fill in the things that they somehow missed out on. And we are going to build those mental muscles with drill and practice. And we're real upfront and overt with the kids. So what we did is we create word lists. Again, I don't think a teacher should spend time doing that because it's recreating the wheel. And what we're going to, and it's hugely time consuming. But what we're going to do is we're going to practice the vowel sounds. So we're going to go mass, a display, a take, crust. Now, by the fact that these are all mixed together, it tells me that we've systematically taught each of those sounds that are at the top there, and they are now review. And then we're going to have the kids do lots and lots of practice on those to build that speed as they're moving through it. Then what we're going to do is we are going to apply the sounds that the kids have learned, the vowel sounds, to multisyllabic words. And then you saw me with the vocabulary. We're going to count the syllables and then say the word. So you're going to watch a video of the kids doing that so you can get a sense of the kind of drill and practice and pacing that we need to do with these kids to build automaticity. These are kids who have been in this program for about 60 days, 60 lessons. Okay, we're gonna do it just a little bit faster. So we're gonna do it like this. Race, 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 trace, 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 face, 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 place, 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 pause, help, well. You can do it, right? All right, automaticity, here we go. It's race, race, race,
trace, 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 face, 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 place, place, place. Well,
oh, I'm sorry, I goofed. Pause,
health,
my fault. Next one, next row. Here we go. It's
head, 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 red, 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 bread, 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 said, said, said,
pause,
switch, switch.
the next one is
All, small, 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 tall, 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 stall, stall, stall,
pause.
covered, hovered.
Nice job, Blake, you get the top row. Okay, we're gonna go to column 5, and what we're gonna do is fingers up, and we're gonna count the syllables. So we're gonna do wealthy, wealthy. Got it? Okay, here we go. It's
Wealthy, wealthy, cradle, cradle, system, system, method, method, recursive, recursive, survival, survival.
nice job. And you know what? I'm not having to use my voice with you guys at all because you guys have got it. Okay, we're gonna go to the whole words in column 6. So we're just gonna read straight down. I'm gonna count to 2. 1, 2.
Wealthy,
1, 2.
cradle,
1, 2.
system,
1, 2.
method.
1, 2. Ella, you get that column.
Number 6. Wealthy, cradle, system, method, recursive, survival.
Excellent job. Okay, we're gonna read the phrases. So those kids that you watch on the video, they were all reading around 100 words correct per minute, some of them a little bit lower than that, and all of them came to at least 30 words correct per minute by the time we finished the 75 lessons. One of the students in that group made a 68 word per minute bump across the 68 lessons and is now college bound. So we can make a difference with these kids if we have the tools to do it. So that said, we're going to look at how we can import some of those strategies without the systematic word study. So it's the enabling process. It's not the remedial process, and also providing some instruction. But I'm going to show you some things that we can do with content area text that provides some of that support for the kids and can potentially move them forward, unless they're like an Amber and the discrepancy is so big that she's not going to be able to make the difference. This would have worked for a Marcos. And what we're going to do is we're going to build fluency for the kids and not let it just sit there. Okay, so what we're going to do is, what I do is I take the classroom text that's being used by the teacher, find the chapters that they are going to be requiring the kids to read. And then what I'm going to do is create a Reader's Digest condensed version. And so this is about the Great Depression. And so number 1 is going to go along with a passage that I'm going to create that's a condensed Reader's Digest version. And so what I do is I just go through and I underline in a readable fashion the content that is most important for the kids to wrap their heads around and understand. And so this one is: no one who lived through the Great Depression forgot it. Jobless men trudged everywhere looking for work. The hungry lined up for handouts. Misery stalked Americans. One survivor remembered. There were many beggars who would come to your back door, and so on. So by doing this, what I'm doing is underlining not the easiest things, but the things that are most important conceptually. And then ideally, if we have classroom teachers doing this, they know what information they think is going to be most important and aligned to the test that they're going to be giving the kids. So the condensed Reader's Digest version looks like, there's more of that page, looks like this. And so then what I've done is I've gone through and I'm going to, this is the condensed text that comes out of the textbook. And then what I did was I went through and I picked words that I knew would be hard for them to read, like stalked, and also vocabulary words that were going to be ones that I wanted to instruct the kids on. So depression, trudged, survivor, misery, and stalked would have been in those vocabulary lessons like we did before the break. Okay, so we're going to do this. So you guys be the kids. The first word is depression. We're going to say it in syllables. It's depression, and the word is depression. Okay. The next word is trudge. Everybody, what's the word? Trudge. And the next word is trudge. So we're just going to have to practice those words out loud. And then what we're going to do is we are going to have the kids practice reading it. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at accuracy, because we know that the kids have to have accuracy before they get fluency, or they're going to have comprehension problems. So I'm going to model for you with Andra, Kirsten, and Chuck what I would be doing in having the kids read this. So your goal is to read with accuracy and not do backups, because a lot of our low kids will read and they'll get to the period and then they'll go back and restart because they're kind of recharging their engine for the next sentence. So you want to read carefully, watch the small words. So I'm going to read the first sentence, and then I'm going to call on Andra, Kirsten, or Chuck to read another sentence. So this is about the Great Depression, and it describes what it was like. No one who lived through the Great Depression forgot it. Chuck?
Jobless men trudged everywhere looking for work.
Nice job. Kirsten?
The hungry lined up for handouts.
Nice job. Andra?
Misery stalked Americans.
So there's that vocabulary word, misery. So how did people feel during the Great Depression, Andra?
Very depressed, downtrodden.
Oh, and you know what? That was excellent. You used our vocabulary word depressed. That's great. Okay, my turn. One survivor remembered there were beggars who would come to your back door. Andra?
They would say they were hungry.
Good. Kirsten?
I wouldn't give them money because I didn't have it.
Chuck?
But I did give them something to eat.
So people were going around to back doors and begging for things. Why was that, Chuck?
Because of the Great Depression, nobody had money.
Nobody had money, nobody had jobs. And so they had to, that was the way they could survive. And so some kind people would not have money to give them, but what would they do, Kirsten?
They'd give them food.
They'd give them food, at least give them something to eat. So it was a difficult time. All right, now the next thing we're going to do is, after we've done that, so calling on individuals to read, then what we're going to do is I'm going to model for them good reading at a pace that they can follow. So that's that prosody building. So I want you to watch as I read. I'm going to read like a podcaster. And then Chuck and Andra and Kirsten had really nice fluency, but I'm going to scale it down so that the kids can follow along. No one who lived through the Great Depression forgot it. Jobless men trudged everywhere looking for work. The hungry lined up for handouts. Misery stalked Americans. Everybody still following along? Because we're going to do a timing in a little bit. One survivor remembered there were beggars who would come to your back door. They would say they were hungry. I wouldn't give them money because I didn't have it, but I did give them something to eat. Okay, now after I model, then we're going to have the kids read it together so that they can practice that prosody that they've heard. And then we're going to go to 1 minute or 30-second timings times 2 so that they have that fluency practice. Now, the reason we're doing this is we're working on fluency, we're working on accuracy, we're working on vocabulary, and we're also working on content knowledge. Now, for the Marcos kid who had to stay up overnight and read and try to digest things and read things 3 or 4 times, now what we're going to have them do is read these little passages 3 or 4 times. And we have some classroom teachers who are actually creating those and passing them on to their colleagues. And they can be warm-ups at the beginning of the class period for those kids who are low readers. For high readers, we give them an alternative assignment. I want you to summarize. Or I want you to create one of these condensed passages for the kids. That's also really gets the kids engaged in the text. Okay, so another idea that you can pass along. All right, now the next thing that we're going to do is, we know from the comprehension research that simple summarization is a very strong comprehension activity. So what we're now doing is we're going to have the kids go back and identify the topic. Oops, let's go back here. So what was this passage about? And it was about what? The Great Depression. And now what I'd like you to do in the chat box is identify one thing that you learned about the Depression that was important that would describe it. Now with the kids, in order to do a summary, we're actually having them underline 2 or 3 important sentences or concepts that they learned about the Great Depression. So just for you guys to do it, what we're going to do is have you go to the chat box and identify if you are, let's do it this way. If you are, have a first name that starts with A through L, I'm going to have you look at the first paragraph and pick out one important detail about the Great Depression. And then if you are M through Z, first name, we'll have you put into the chat box one important detail from the second passage. So I'm going to go ahead and have you do that now. Oops, I'm sorry. Well, nice job. So you guys are fast. I was having trouble finding my chat box. Okay, so beggars went to the back door. They were jobless. They were hungry. They were depressed. The hungry lined up. People would ask for money. People did not have a job, so they had no money for food. You know, the kinds of things that you're pulling up, the bull market crashed. So all of those are important details for, oops, I was on the wrong one, wasn't I? Important for the kids to do. So what we have them do is underline 2 or 3 important, identify the topic, then underline 2 or 3 important details that describe the Depression. And then from that, because they've underlined on their little passage that we've created for them, they can write a summary by writing a sentence that introduces the topic, by writing 2 or 3 sentences about the details, and then concluding with a sentence that tells you the most important or central idea that you learned. Now, just having the kids go through the directions is not enough. So, of course, what we're going to do is we're going to model. So this is what I wrote. The Great Depression was a time of misery. People looked everywhere for work. The hungry lined up for handouts. Beggars would come to your door. And the Great Depression, my conclusion was the Great Depression was a terrible time. Now, once we've done the model, then for kids who need it, we're going to provide a framed writing passage so that we've got the sentences started for the kids and they can actually form cohesive sentences. So the Great Depression was, there's your introduction, people, something, they, something, the Great Depression was. And now we've got a simple summary. Again, now what I like is anything that does double, triple duty for the kids. They get decoding practice for accuracy. They get practice with fluency doing this. They get content knowledge, and now they're getting comprehension and summary writing from the passages. So a nice process for really building that understanding for the kids so that they can then pass their content area tests and their classes. So it's a real nice routine to follow through. I like to do this in collaboration with classroom teachers because they know their content and they can pop them out way faster than I can. So that those are possible processes for you. Okay, I'm going to stop yakking at you and we're going to put you, oh, let's see, you can't see my handouts, can you? If you were going to go into a practice session, what we would have you do if you had this as a handout is actually, this is just a little practice passage that you can do. Those of you who are in consulting positions and working with classroom teachers, you can have them practice. So here's another passage that was pulled out of that condensed text that will be in your handouts if you choose to download them. So now we're going to look at creating, this is the stock market prosperity, and that would be the second condensed passage. And then on the next page, it shows you a third one that you can create your own condensed passage with, and then create these little extra passage reading practices for your high-risk readers. Okay. Okay, now the process is this. I did put it on a slide for you so that you would have the procedures. We have people preview the text. We underline or highlight to create a condensed annotated condensed version. The condensed version should align with course objectives and assessments, including central ideas, key concepts, and critical facts. And then we're going to transcribe those condensed versions into 50 to 100 word passages for repeated readings. And there you've got fluency building as well. Okay. The next little tool that I want to provide for you is we also provide study guides for our kids, and we provide a 2-column format. And so now we're going to go back to those little passages that we've created that align with the teacher's tasks. And what we're going to ask is questions that help them rehearse that information. And then what we're going to do is we're going to teach the kids, we're going to have the kids write the answers and check them. And then in order to practice for a test or study, they're going to ask themselves question number 1, fold the 2-column study guide in half, little origami. They're going to think about the answer. They're going to check it. If it's easy, they're going to go on to question number 2, ask themselves the question, then check the answer. If it was difficult, they're going to circle number 2. They're going to go to number 3, and then what? Come back to number 2 until they've got it. Okay. Okay. So what we're going to do now is this slide is just a little review of what we're going to do with comprehension. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at this process where we're going to have teachers activate and build prior knowledge. So in the chat book, what tool could you use to activate and build prior knowledge that we went over in the earlier part of the session? What tool could you use to do that? So just a quick little perception check. What tool could you use to activate and build prior knowledge? This is the disadvantage without handouts. We'll wait for about 30 seconds, and then if it's not there, I'll give you the answer. Oh, nice. Okay, so you could use that vocabulary log. That would be a real easy one to go back to. Then we're going to explicitly teach students to summarize. That's what we looked at in that last slide. That will help your students with that. And then we're going to ask teachers that during reading, these are based on comprehension research, that we ask questions while the kids read. And then we talked about we want to teach the kids to ask questions themselves because they get excited. And then we're going to look at teacher attention on story elements. Who's the story about? What was the problem that started things going? What was the goal? What were the events and what were the conclusion? One that we really like to teach the kids to do is visualize as they read. And then we strongly encourage teachers to use graphic organizers. So those are all the, basic, nice set of tools that are not unmanageable to share with teachers as we are working on building comprehension in the content areas. So that's support that we can give our kids throughout and do it as systematically as possible. The next slide that we're going to look at is, at one point we were going to write a book on doing this and never got around to it. But one of the things that I see people talking a lot about is graphic organizers. but not indicating the reason why we do it, except for that they're graphic organizers. And so I just wanted to stress that we use graphic organizers to help the kids see the relationships in the materials that they're looking at. So we can use, for vocabulary, we can have them use diagrams, illustrations, semantic maps and webs, and visual spatials. The vocabulary that I showed you, we consistently use pictures to illustrate the sentences that the kids were working with in those connections. And now with the internet, pictures are pretty easy to download and pop into a PowerPoint. So that's something that we encourage people to do with their vocabulary. With sequencing, visual change, timelines, cycle graphs, those are all extremely useful for the kids. Cause and effect, we use visual chains and problem solution. Graphic organizers, we use compare and contrast. We use matrices and Venn diagrams to show how things overlap. And then with main ideas, and we use visual spatials, outlines, and semantic maps and webs. So those are the things that we're going to strongly suggest we practice doing with our teachers. Okay, now, the last thing I want to look at, and then we'll do a little bit of a review, is with the fluency issue. This is kind of, I threw this in not knowing where we would be with time. But one of the things that I would strongly suggest that you take back to your schools or to your classrooms is something that I mentioned early on with the fluency issue. And that is that we ask ourselves as classroom teachers, or if you're a consultant, we ask the classroom teachers to pull a 200 to 300 word passage from their textbooks, and that they listen at least to a high performing student, a middle performing student, and a low performing student, so that they can hear the differences between those students that are doing well, those who are kind of muddling their way through, and those who are the lowest kids. So that if they were to employ something like those condensed passages for repeated readings, they have a sense of the differences with the kids. If the school is not doing a systematic DIBELS scan or screen, or Ames Web or something like that, I also like to have the teachers actually sit down and listen to 5 kids a day at the beginning of each semester. They have a new class load. When oral reading fluency first came out and people were promoting its use, being a doubting Thomas, I don't do anything unless I really understand the rationale for it. And that's actually something that I always try to share with classroom teachers. I'm not going to ask you to do something unless you understand the why of it. And that was why I played those audio tapes for you with the kids, is because it's really important not only to have the research, but you also have to have the pragmatic experience with the kids. By the time students are in 5th and 6th grade, a lot of teachers are no longer listening to the kids read aloud. We just had a school district in New Mexico do DIBELS with their 5th and 6th graders for the very first time. And what they found was they had about 50 to 60% of their schools with the kids falling either in the red with at risk, or in the yellow with being students of concern. The classroom teachers were shocked. They were absolutely shocked because they hadn't listened to the kids read themselves. My guess would be if we had done an inventory and asked the teachers to rank order the kids from high to low, that the lowest kids would be kids who had reading problems. That would just be a guess. Now, the story I started to tell you is because I was a doubting Thomas when all of this reading fluency stuff came out, much like the teachers in the school district were. I went and listened to some 9th grade students in a regular ELA class at the high school level. And so I had them read 2 passages for 1 minute from the text the teacher was using. And so student number 1 read 33 words correct per minute, and the second passage, 24 words correct per minute. That was your special ed student who was reading like Amber. And you could tell just listening, it was horrible. Student number 2 read 96 words correct per minute on both passages, was an ELL student. And then we had the rest of the kids going up from there. So we had 105 and 98 with 102 words correct per minute. Average at this age should be about 150. So we're under par here, reading like Marcos. These kids were not identified for intervention. We had 107 and so on. And the group went all the way up to here. What I did was I took the students, oops, I'm sorry. There we go. I took this to the classroom teacher and I said, without looking at the numbers, looking at the names of the students, I said, I bet these two students are getting D's or F's. And I bet all the way up to about these three students are getting D's and F's. And she said, you've got it. How did you do that? All you did was spend 2 minutes with them. And then I said, these kids that are in the middle here, I bet you these kids are getting C's, maybe some B's. And then we're going to look at the rest of the kids on up doing better. And what the teacher said is, you've rank ordered those kids almost exactly the way I would, just on the basis of those fluency tests. So again, very, very powerful. The ability to read words both accurately and fluently are going to affect every content area that these kids are in middle school or high school. So that's just a little tip for you that you might be able to use as you move forward. Okay, with that in mind, what we're going to do is we're going to look at, again, at these are the things that we want to engage the kids with. So we want to do word recognition for those kids who are going to have to go to a pullout in order to receive that remediation. For kids who need fluency, even if they're not in intervention, we're going to try to provide that support for them in gen ed classes. We had one middle school where all of the content area teachers developed fluency passages and agreed to do one per week. And what the teachers figured was if they did one per week, then they were hitting them multiple times during the week across the content areas. So, you know, there are all kinds of different ways that you can do this. Question here is, were you suggesting that content area teachers ask a high, middle, and lower student to read aloud, or was that in a special education class? I would ask them to read aloud, but privately. So we're going to pull them to, that's a really good question. So during the first week of school, what we ask the content area teachers to do is to pull that high, middle, and low kid at the end of the first week. Well, actually, let me back it up. If you're already into the school year, what we're going to do is ask them to pull a high, middle, and low kids so that they can hear what those students are up against. And it's privately, it's a 1 minute timed assessment from the content area that they're teaching from their textbook. So yes, I'm asking content area teachers to do that so that the Scarletts of the world, when she gets mad, we understand that it's because she cares. It's not because she's a bad kid. And we understand the need for supports. That's huge for these kids. The reason that we're asking for the middle kids, if we've had enough time with those classroom teachers, we're going to explain the need for fluency building for the middle kids that haven't topped out fluency yet. So yes, I would ask classroom teachers to do that. At the beginning of the year or the beginning of a semester, in the ideal world, we have teachers pull 5 kids a day and they listen to the kids and they record those scores. So you take 10 minutes at the end of each day until you have got all of your kids, and hopefully you don't have a class load of 40. It's going to take a couple weeks if you do. But it's an easy process. So we're not asking teachers to be reading teachers. We're still asking them to be content area teachers. But it does give those kids that needed boost. And our goal, of course, is academic excellence or capability for all of these kids. So I think it's well within our ability or our mandate as teachers to provide them with the skills as well as the content that they need in order to go out after high school and hold their head ups when they go to get a job. Okay. Okay, I'm going to stop for just a minute and I'm going to see if you have any questions. So in fact, what I'd like to do is let's put you in breakout rooms of 3 And what I'd like you to do is generate any questions that you've got in terms of application of these strategies when you go back to your schools, either as a classroom teacher or as a consultant or administrator. What are some things that you have questions about? And we'll try to resolve those before it's time to go. Hey, it's nice to have you all back. I really appreciate your participation in this in-service this morning. We're moving towards wrapping things up, but I want to make sure that we answer any questions that you've got. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes. And what we'll do is have you pop into the chat box any questions that you've got. And I'll be watching that, and we'll see if we can resolve anything that we've left unclarified. And if you have no questions, you can take a resting, relaxing 2 minutes. How do you find? Well, I hope you had a nice time in your breakout room. So the question that is coming up here is, how do you find the time to do this? This year that is so bumpy with COVID affecting our lives in multiple ways, it's difficult to find the time. And so what I always suggest to people is, right now, teachers need to be gentle on themselves. But the biggest suggestion to get it moving forward is to do just one passage. If that's what you want to do is work on passages, then I would just tell myself I want to do one a week, and that's it. Now, question is, how long does it take to create one of those condensed passages? It's a practice effect. And if you don't know the content, it's going to take longer than if you know the content. If you've been teaching the same thing for the last 3 years and you know that textbook, it really can happen pretty fast. And with technology now, it's pretty easy to create those texts because you can even highlight and paste if you want. I type fast enough that I prefer just to type them in. It's just a little bit faster. If there's somebody that you have that can coordinate this stuff, then what we do is we assign people. I used to do a workshop a bazillion years ago that we called collaborative instruction. And what we actually did was we brought teams of teachers together for a week during a summer workshop. And what we would do is I would present strategies to the teams of teachers that were working. They would meet as a group and they would divide the work up. So basically what they would say is, somebody would say, I'm really good at highlighting. That was my trick through college. Somebody else says, I can type really fast. Somebody else says, I'm really good at graphic organizers. And they just created stuff and then shared. And what we found was the teachers that had that extended period of time, that's on your wish list, right? For when things calm down and get quote unquote back to normal. But what they did was those teachers that worked, for example, if there were 3 middle school history teachers working together, they would get the process started for the first couple of weeks of school. And then what I found them doing is they were meeting at the copy machine. And one of our rules was, if you create something, share it. Is there going to be a problem where some people will do more work than others? Yes. But the rule is, if you're doing it for your own kids, share it with the others. And then the nice thing with Google Docs, now we can share and people can go in and let's say I make a 2-column study guide, but it doesn't quite align with my test, but somebody else has started it. It's on a Google Doc. I can go in and modify it very easily for my class. So a few suggestions there. My wish list, of course, is to give you more time. And that's just not going to happen right now. So we put these tools in a box and we keep them there for when we can develop that process. We always like to have administrators on board because, of course, they're the ones that can start setting that up. In the days when we didn't have to spend all of our staff meeting looking at safety procedures and so on, we actually had consultants, consulting teachers, coaches, sometimes administrators who would take one strategy in at a time and ask the teachers to each do one. An example of that would be, in fact, I'm going to move to it in just a minute, is the last slide that will be in your live binder. Is that what you call it, live binder? Is this slide. And what I thought is, what can I do to provide you with information that you can use going forward? For reading, the Teaching Reading Resource Sourcebook with CORE, the Consortium for Reaching Excellence out of California, created this source book. Are you guys familiar with this book? Yes? Some? No? Some. It's an excellent resource for teaching explicitly foundational skills, going into multisyllabic words and into comprehension strategies across the grade levels. Really, really well done. Sharon Vaughn's teachers reading the Reading Teacher Sourcebook. I love Sharon Vaughn's stuff because it's research-based, but it's also presented in a way that doesn't put you to sleep and that you can actually use in your classroom. So this is a wonderful book of strategies for middle school students with reading difficulties. The Writing Revolution is great. One of the reasons I thought about bringing this up at this point is Hochman and Wexler have a strategy that's but, so, because, and what students write are 3 sentences that follow those patterns. So the American Revolution was devastating because, or beneficial because, and then so, and then so they use those connectors, and I've forgotten the exact sequence, but it's in the Writing Revolution book. And one of our principles in our area where everything is still really stressed is having each teacher do one of those sets of sentences in their content area classes once a week. So, there are things that we can do that are simple, and I apologize for not putting that particular procedure in your handouts, but I think I will before we post it to the internet. So those are resources that you can look at as you're moving forward that will help you perhaps with some of those time things. Is pick something that's doable, and then we're going to proceed from there. So Andrea, would you publish the last, I'm sorry. The last poll
is closing.
Yeah, it says closing, but then I'm going to shift and we're going to have Jennifer ask some questions as well.
Okay.
Okay, so I just wanted you to do a little bit of thinking about what we've talked about today. And so the question that I'm asking is, what strategies might you use or share, time permitting, when you go back to your classrooms or to your consulting positions or coaching positions?
We're up to about 65%. I'll just give a few more seconds. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll and share the results.
That's super. So it's great to see that it looks like there's something that you can grab from the 3 hours that we spent together. I just want to express to all of you that I am so impressed with Pennsylvania and all that you are doing for your kids. And we're thinking that what we've been talking about today is consistent with what you have been working with Generation Word.
Word generation.
Word generation.
Yes.
I knew I had that backwards. And I, during our break, when you guys were working on the questions that you might have for me, we did some talking about how wonderful the support is that you are getting from Patton and the strategies and the different people that they're bringing in to share their expertise and that you are now employing. And so again, my congratulations to all of you in the professional development that you're doing and the things that you're employing with your kids. If you would like to be in touch with me, I'm going to turn this over to Jen in just a moment. And if you have anything that you would like to get from me that I haven't provided in the handouts, I'm easy to reach at thethirdquest.com. I just started a literacy newsletter for nerds, literacy nerds. And so we're sharing pragmatic tips. So for example, if you have students with BD reversals, the tip that we gave in this first one that we put out a couple of weeks back is if you have your kids with BD reversals, put a dot under every D in the word study or the passages that they're going to be reading. What it does is we teach the kids, if it's got a dot under it and you've dotted all the D's, you're going to say the D sound when you read it. And we just don't even address the B. If it doesn't have a dot, it's going to say the other sound. And that has been straightening out those BD reversals for kids that have been doing it for 6 to 7 years. So they've heard every mnemonic device in the world, and what they need to do is just get correct practice, because every time they do it wrong, reinforces that error. So if you're interested in that newsletter, there's a sign up on thethirdquest.com. I've also got my email address there. If you've got questions, concerns, comments, please feel free to be in touch. The adolescent reading programs that we put together that employ these things for you. So if you're asking about time, you don't have time to do it. We did those things for you. So the things that we've talked about today are imported into the Third Quest. And we now have a new program called the Parallel Universe that is an interesting hybrid. What I do is I deliver the instructions so the kids hear my voice. They have written print that they practice from with the word study and the passage reading and so on, all those things that we talked about today. And it will say and then an adult sits with the kids, coaching and teaching them when the kids are responding. So it's kind of an interesting hybrid, but we've been seeing about a 30 word per minute bump across 41 lessons with that. So those are some options for you. If you have questions about any of those programs, you can reach us at thethirdquest.com. And you can sign up for the newsletter if you want. Okay. So again, thank you very, very much. Jennifer's going to talk with you a little bit. I'm going to hang out and listen. And she's going to help us pull the strings together on all the other wonderful things that you're doing in the Patton regions and tie that together for us.
Thank you so much, Marilyn. This was really, really fabulous. I'm going to ask Karen to